Okay, Sarah here. So this recording, if you're watching it, is a simulation. So person J has been our sample case where we're walking through a simulation of the personal income tax return here in Canada. This is actually the third recording. So if you are following along, if you're curious about this particular topic, I would really recommend you watch part one, which is the manual calculation. If you're curious where we would have gotten this 137137 number, so manually, and just also going through some background, some high level overview. If not, then recording number two was actually using an application like Wealthsimple, which is very friendly, right? Low cost, even $0. If you want to pay nothing, you pay for what you want. Which is again getting us to that same conclusion, which it did. So I'm happy about that. So I have the bandwidth to do a third recording because I do not like making these recordings. I'm not very good at them, but it is a promise that I made several times. I've gotten many requests, predominantly from students who wanted actually to see tax software. So not Wealthsimple, but actually, tax software that is used by practitioners, right? Because that's sort of maybe where they're working towards. In the classroom, we do a lot more manual calculation because we do believe in learning the fundamentals, and then software is an aid after the fact, right? We have to understand the fundamentals first. So anyway, so we'll see if this recording works out. Might need coffee. Let's see. Okay, so for our person J, we had a conclusion from the earlier examples with a taxable income of 5,43430. Again, a little bit of rounding there. And the conclusion on a federal level of 137,137. So I'm going to back up a little bit here. Again, if you've watched the previous recordings, great. If not, then I just might want to catch you up to speed. So here, if I can find it. Yes, hello, person J. Person J is our example for today where they have a variety of different sources of income. Okay, this is the case facts here. And so working through, say, their employment income through their T4, T5. Again, I would really urge you to maybe check out that second recording. I do a better job at kind of walking through the components to that net income for tax purposes, which we have here. I'm going to just jump over to the Wealthsimple example that we did, which again worked out really well. So I'm glad, I'm happy. There you go, right? And so again, a great way to maybe file your own taxes if that's your preference. But what I'm going to do next is actually open up my software. So I do use Tax Cycle. There are, of course, other options available. Profile, Tax Prep. I'm not 100% sure on the top of my head if that's still available, but many options, right, for professionals, for tax practitioners to use. And I mean the same idea, really, right? So yeah, I again, the same thesis applies here where we need to be very, very careful with what we're entering into a program, into any software. And so Tax Cycle looks something like this. I actually would, after putting in all those preliminary information, so that's under your tab. And over here, you can see you can kind of toggle around, maybe have a little bit more flexibility in how to input things, right? It's not as controlled, say, as something like Wealthsimple, but, starting off with your engagement tab, setting up the parameters, the info tab where you need to enter all those key pieces of information, the client, the taxpayer's information. You can see here, right, I've entered most of it. Again, I didn't enter some, right? Fake address. That's not going to be too detrimental to our simulation here. But this, of course, is the starting point. Once that's in and you as a practitioner have been granted authorization, this is where we use the lovely AFR feature, as mentioned, to populate a lot of the information when the timing is right. Right? Because we don't want to do this too early. Otherwise, we run the risk of downloading incomplete information. So of course, that's a balance. Otherwise, in terms of entering the information, all right, what do I want to do here? We have our client, again, as mentioned. So we've entered all those preliminary information. So just as you would with Normally I have my keyboard, but I'm just doing this manually right now on my laptop. So T4, right? If you have a T4 slip, then just as you would have said in Wealthsimple or here in a tax software, populating that accordingly, right? Many of us will have it just tabbed here actually. And so if you're using AFR, this would likely be populated already. Otherwise, you must manually enter. And again, this is just, it's very rudimentary, right? Taking the slips, taking the source information, making sure it's appropriate, and then making sure every single box is populated. You're not just picking and choosing your favorite boxes. Okay, so again, just being careful, I guess, really, right? And just capturing the information. So we'll do that for the T4. I will do this as well for the T5. So again, box 24, box 24, box 24, right? You can see that there. This one actually will populate automatically. They know to gross it up by 38%. Okay, and they will then take the dividend tax credit appropriately as well. I mean, tax software, Wealthsimple is really good too, I would say. I'm not saying it's not good, but you know, you're paying for professional tax software as well to, you know, hopefully provide a little bit more value, which it does, I believe, if you know how to use it. Okay, so we have the T4, we have the T5, which again is not being held in any tax registered account, which is why we have to capture this information. It is taxable. So again, just acknowledging and respecting these tax deferred, tax advantaged accounts. Let's not forget about the T2125. So we do need to populate for that. Right, so capturing that information here. And I mean, again, if you're using Wealthsimple, it is very similar. This, though, is actually capturing the form itself. TaxCycle will either show you the form itself as it is presented to the CRA, or will have its own form that then helps you populate the form in a more effective manner. So in this case, this very much looks like the T2125 form. So populating the revenues accordingly, populating the expenses accordingly. Again, I'm keeping this one very, very short and brief, right? And just cross-referencing, making sure that's appropriate. If there's any motor vehicle, any home office expenditures, this is where I have a separate recording on Wealthsimple where it did not quite pass the test. It didn't quite do a good job in capturing that complexity. So this is where I would say, if that's the case and it's quite substantial, having a practitioner assist you, because our software obviously can handle a bit more of that complexity. But we have the 106028, we have a taxable capital gain. So if you have the T5008, then of course that's where you could populate that. Okay, and it'll help you then transpose that into the Schedule 3. But Schedule 3 is where we capture the capital gains or capital losses as applicable. Okay, so again, just understanding, I would say, the forms and therefore knowing how to populate the forms, I guess, is the biggest difference. So the more exposure, the more practice you have, the more experience you have, then, you know, a lot of these we actually do talk about in the classroom. It's just maybe applying that is a challenge for some once they enter practice, once they start practicing. But here, because I didn't have a T5008, I just populated that manually. I think for our case, it was Shopify, right? And again, I'm just kind of populating some information, right? If I had actual facts. I know my capital gain was 230732, so I just kind of played with these numbers for this simulation. Please don't come after me. Okay, the capital gain, 230732. Rental income, I've captured that, did I? 776. Let's take a look. 776. Yes, I think we did already, right? If I remember correctly. Oh, no, wrong one. T776. Okay, so again, this is very much capturing what the form looks like, actually. So it does a good job there. And then last but not least, dependents. So this is where I always have to double check I populated this appropriate dependent. Yeah, so actually inputting the information to start. Okay, so then, and then read carefully. I mean, really just at the end of the day, reading carefully. I can't express it enough. Saying yes to the right boxes, saying no to the right boxes. At the end of the day, I think this really makes or breaks the right practitioner, right? If you don't know how to click boxes, then that's an issue. So We said yes to eligible dependent. We said yes to the disability tax credit. And this here, you can see they're double checking. There is a valid T2201. That's the disability tax certificate, right? Caregiver amount. So I don't think tax software here in this case is as automated as, say, Wealthsimple. Wealthsimple, again, is for the everyday person who doesn't know maybe exactly what relations are with some of these questions. And so it's helping a lot more. Whereas if you're a practitioner, you're sort of expected to know, to read, and so don't expect it to populate things automatically. You actually have to maybe tell it and check it off accordingly. The green actually is just me as a reviewer. I always double check, right? So you enter it once, but do you double check? And that's something I always tell my students as well. You entered it, but did you do any self-review? Because we might have misread it or misentered it, whatever the reason may be. But ultimately, no excuse there. Okay, so here, again, capturing whatever applicable information. And then I think for our person J, that was kind of it. And so where I go to next personally, so as you're maneuvering through, right, we have a lot of sections over on the left, and if it's overwhelming, right, rather than having all forms, because you could have all forms if you wish, if that's what you want to use, but if you know what forms to use, or maybe this is not a new file, it's a rollover file from an you've had this client for a while, then filtering it for the use makes it a little less overwhelming, I would say, and just double checking you are happy with what it is you're seeing, you have populated the appropriate forms. But I do like to make use of this 2-year form, especially if I have a comparative, just making sure, hey, if we reported this type of income in the past, how come that's not coming up again? And so here, this is really capturing that first line, if I can find that again, the net income for tax purposes. So 543,430. So that is line 23600, 23600. So again, just it's not rounded here, but fine, 543,430. And in this case, there were no Division C deductions. So again, making a note of whatever limited Division C deductions made applicable. And our line 26000, that is the taxable income number, will be the same. Okay, so again, just as a reviewer, or even you as a preparer, if you are a preparer, or if you're just curious, right, for whatever reason you're on this recording, yeah, just populating accordingly. And now we're moving over to our tax credits, which I did say I think I expected 8 for this particular person. So we have the BPA, we have the eligible dependent, which here in our manual calculations, we included and bumped up the caregiver. You can see here they separate the two. CPP, EI, Canada Employment, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 7, that's the disability transfer, which includes the disability amount and the supplement amount because it was a minor child, so they get a bit of a enhancement there. And we're missing the dividend tax credit, which is actually over here. So again, just as you familiarize yourself, a tax software program like TaxCycle is not as intuitive, let's say, as a program like Wealthsimple or UFile. So it's not like something we'd recommend for an everyday individual to use. But if you, as a student looking to progress on to practice, of course, then you can familiarize yourself with these programs and just learn to read it appropriately again. Even if you're going quickly, these are things that you should pick up on, right? Hey, how come I have no medical? Hey, how come I don't have any donation, right? And just double checking, revisiting accordingly. Here, okay, so again, the 154,105, that is the number we expect to see. So if I make my way down here, so we're using the 14.5% rate, yes. So this one here, 154,105, so that is the number we expect to see. Again, the non-refundable tax credits as well as that dividend tax credit together, that gives me my federal taxes payable, which is that 137,137 rounded, which is what I expected to see here. And it is also, if I can find that, Wealthsimple, 137 right here. Right? So again, everything should jive, everything should be aligned. It's just what tool you want to use. And I actually know a handful of people who have done manual calculations I'm very impressed by them. They have the paper tax return and they know how to fill it out. So they are doing this all manually. But nowadays you have software. So what tool do you want to use to carry this task out? 137137, the provincial portion, as you can see here, right, that is its own calculation, and it's really driven. That's why we don't focus too much on this calculation in the classroom, because it is leveraging very much from what we've already inputted for the federal calculation. It's just recalculating as needed for the provincial rates, the provincial tax credits. And so you can see here we're given that one line, which was 78,795. And so that is really the total, right? For line 43500, that is the total taxes payable. And this is where, again, I just remind you, if you watched recording number 2, if not, then I'll repeat it one more time. This is where we'll reduce this with any taxes that had been withheld, any installment payments that have been made. Okay, so that's over here. Oh, what happened? Right, so the income tax deducted, the installments paid. In this case, in this simulation, no installments, no withholdings were made, which is why our conclusion is that same 215932. But of course, that is not what would be applicable, because your employer would absolutely withhold, right? Absolutely. And so we would have a line here. It would be in your T4, right? And that would, of course, then substantially offset this. So ideally, you don't have any substantial amounts owing, but because this individual is earning other sources of income that do not have withholdings, then that is where installments come to play. Okay, so again, if you're curious about this concept, I have another recording on this concept of tax installments, prepaying our taxes. As an individual, you might have received a letter saying you need to prepay your taxes, and if not, then you're going to pay penalties, interest charges. And so if you have, then of course this will reduce the number of your final balance owing. And so this is, again, a summary I will very much review. It is a big resource for me. Now, if you are using this, right, this is where you're using the brains of a software, which you can see here. I did a lot of no-nos. I did a lot of overrides here because, again, this is just for this simulation. But as a reviewer, if I see a lot of overrides, that is a big red flag. So as a student, as a junior staff member, right, if you're watching this, this is where you have to be very careful. No, there is an input. We do not override to get the number we need to get, because it's so intermingled. It's so, the software is communicating with each other, right? So you have to be careful. You have to find the right input, which in itself might actually take a while. Where do I input the source so that it populates correctly everywhere? Otherwise, this is an example where you have not used software as intended, okay? And that is a big issue. Ultimately, you address all the review notes, right, that the software has for you. Then you address the review notes your reviewer may have for you, fine. And then ultimately, as we work towards sending the clients, or, be it yourself, the materials to review, right? So again, software is great. They will maybe spit out a letter. I like to kind of customize mine depending on the client, depending on how they respond to information, how much information, how little information. But this is a nice summary. And as you can see here, if you're curious, what am I going to be, sorry, let me just move my face here. What am I going to be communicating to the government, right? Then you can see a lot of these forms are right here. Kind of tough to find. Here you go, T1, right? The summary. And as a taxpayer, this is again where you also have to be a bit careful, making sure you are double checking all of these first few pages at the minimum, that nothing, is looking strange to you. Otherwise, the common schedules, we would see Schedule 3, in this case, T2125, T776, as mentioned, right? Which was used to capture the business income, the rental income, and so on. So those are just some expected forms that we will then print and send to the client to sign off. Otherwise, yeah, this was kind of the purpose of this particular recording. I don't know if it's terribly interesting, but if anyone's ever curious what tax software is like for a tax practitioner, right? This is it. And it is actually very similar to Wealthsimple's interface. I think they just do a nice job at prompting and maybe giving little cues. Hey, read up on this one. But if you're a professional, if you're a tax practitioner, you don't get that same interface because you are expected to know what each line, what each box is going to trigger, what it's going to then maybe transpose over to another form or another calculation. Okay, so that is the takeaway here for this particular simulation. Yeah, ultimately, my last comments, the recording, I'm happy I was able to make it through all three. I didn't need a big break. It worked out very well. So just a few reminders, right? If you're watching this as just an average taxpayer and you're curious, just a reminder, you might be eligible for CRA's simple file program, which is actually they will file for you. You're just a slip-based taxpayer, then checking that out. Otherwise, Wealthsimple, again, be it the basic, the plus, the pro versions that they have, and using that to file your tax compliance. Otherwise, again, if you are maybe a student that is working their way to, public practice and working with clients, then you're going to probably want to use a more sophisticated tax software. And we just went through an example of such. Okay, hopefully this was interesting. I'll see if there's any other common questions that I get, and maybe next year I'll make another recording, but otherwise that's probably it. Thank you.